Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to In Our Skin. I'm so happy to be introducing you to one of my favorite people today. Jerry Bernard is the founder of The Glowing Self and a good friend of mine. G has so much knowledge, and what you'll learn quickly in this episode is that it comes from her life experience. And one thing I know for sure is that the best kind of knowledge comes from our lived experience. Jerry's someone who has transmuted pain into something beautiful. She is a compassionate force, and I'm so excited for you to get to know her. This is the first part of a conversation between Jerry and I that will continue to unfold next week. We're going to get more into the nitty gritty of strategies to use to begin to do this work in relationships. Today, you're going to hear her begin to tell a part of her story, and it will definitely leave you wanting to hear more. Today, we're delving into the intricate world of human connection and the start of our conversation about all things relationships. We'll talk about how knowing ourselves truly is the key to having conscious relationships with others, and we'll dive into parts of her origin story, her why, and the work that she's doing today to create compassionate boundaries, find her true voice, and help others do the same. And we'll begin to look at how we can do so despite early attachment wounds. I think there's a little bit of something for everyone in here, and be sure to tune in next week to look at how you can actually begin to put these practices into place in your life, even though they're vulnerable, even though it's a little scary, because it can be truly life-changing, and I can vouch for that. This is definitely Jerry's area of expertise. You'll hear me talk about how challenging this has been in my own life, and next week you'll hear us talk more about that too. So, without further ado, let's begin. This is In Our Skin, and I am your host, Ashley McCann, psychotherapist and coach, here to bring you resources to help you move through your life with a little more ease and a little more freedom so that you can feel good in the skin you are in.
Okay.
All right.
Hi.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to bring you one of my dear friends and one of the wisest women I know, Jerry. Jerry, I would love for you to introduce yourself here today by telling us how you began to do this work that you are doing, not just for yourself, but for so many others.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley, for having me on your podcast. I feel so excited. I'm so excited to talk to your listeners and to you. So, for me, I have always been a curious person. So, even when I was a little girl, I was going up to people and asking them questions about themselves. And the core of my practice, the glowing self, is about being curious and being compassionate. And I am also a highly sensitive person. I am an empath. I am the adult child of an alcoholic. There
Yeah.
are so many things that make me me. I've always wanted to know, well, why am I how I am and why are other people how they are?
I imagine that as a child, being highly sensitive, being an empath, and being a child of an alcoholic was not easy. And I wonder how you got to a place where that curiosity, and I say it could be allowed because of I know from my own experience what it's like growing up in a household where there is alcohol
Yeah.
and curiosity isn't always the way. Often the way of coping looks a lot different, and it's often to not be curious, to not acknowledge, to not say anything, to not ask the questions. So where did you where did you go for yourself, and how did you get to this place that you could manage those feelings and experiences, for those
Mhm.
actually for those who maybe aren't highly sensitive and don't relate to being an empath, and especially probably for those who do, what was that like for you as a kid, and how did it become something that you now can lean into?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ash. I feel um that for me it was always something that felt very innate, my curiosity. So I feel very grateful for that now. And especially in this day and age, which I love, there's so much acceptance and so much desire for people to start to delve into why am I how I am? And there's more exploration possibility today that didn't exist back then. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot more buttoned upness. So none of what I'm saying is because there's a vilification on my parents or any other parents that were truly doing the best they could because of how their parents raised them. And you could go into the whole conversation around generational trauma.
I
I mean,
know.
that's a whole other
And I
bag,
do want
right?
to immediately dive into it and commend my family because what they did were ways of coping, right? And
Right.
so you as a highly sensitive kid who's,
Hmm.
empathetic in a way that maybe other people in her family weren't. So
Yes.
what was it like for you when you look back now? What was it like for
Mhm.
you as a kid and what did you do with that led you to where you
Mm.
are now?
I love that question. Doing so much inner child work, inner teen work. I find myself just wanting to like rub my heart here, feeling so
Yeah.
much gratitude because man, they didn't know what the heck was going on.
Yeah.
So for me, the things that I leaned on, my resources were being an empath was both a blessing and a curse. And it allowed me to explore my emotions through creativity, which is another part of me. I'm an artist. I have an art studio. I
Yeah.
teach people how to paint. Creativity has been such a huge blessing in my self expression. And there's things that I've learned through my own work. And I realized, oh my gosh, I was resourcing things that therapists will teach you to do and put in your toolbox, and how resourceful we are without having someone tell us what to do. So there's things that I would do, like I love singing, I love dancing. So there were things that I did growing up that now I look back on and I'm just like, heck yes, little Jerry. You know what I mean? That I didn't realize. And understanding my emotions, which took a second. And it wasn't without dark nights of the soul and moments of really peeling back the baggage and really understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing, why the people are around me are doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then there are these moments throughout my life where I needed to lean in to getting help or to understanding why
Mhm.
maybe I was having a certain emotional response to something, why other people around me were. So,
Yeah. It's interesting hearing you talk about that curiosity and compassion being what got you through because I think for a lot of us we don't start there. It takes a lot of work to get there. And that curiosity of others, it sounds like was a compassion outward as well, even though maybe you were suffering and relationships were hard.
right.
Um, would you say that that for you came more naturally, or do you think you had to go through
Mm.
phases of not being able to have that compassion or not being able to be curious because of your own experiences?
Yeah, I think our pain points do, if we choose to, can turn into our purpose. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's a little bit of both. I think being an empath with a family that lacked a lot of boundaries made me learn a lot about where I needed boundaries, what boundaries even are,
Yeah.
right? What emotions are and how to process them. I didn't really have a choice. When you're going through
Mm,
traumatic experiences, you don't have a choice, or when you're being parentified or some of your needs aren't met. I felt like I didn't really have a choice but to figure it out.
yeah.
So it turned into my way of resourcing and coping and building tools. And what I have found and what I have learned now is that we are such resilient beings. We truly are.
Yeah.
All of us are. And we try to protect ourselves sometimes in ways that are not great for us, but we think they are,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't really an option for me in my mind to stop here when things were hard, which is really interesting, thinking about my resilience and perseverance from a spiritual perspective. Looking back, I kind of am in reverence to that, even though it seemed so hard in the moment as a child or a teen, just to think about, wow, okay, even in these moments, you were still wanting to figure it out.
Jerry, hearing you talk about this idea of, was I actually more compassionate and did my curiosity help me, or did I have to as a function of safety and self protection and functioning
Hmm.
when things were not always functional around you. Right. And so,
Yes.
in a way, your life experiences pushed you toward having to figure it out because the alternate didn't feel like a good option. To not figure it
Yes.
out didn't
Yes.
feel
Hmm.
like something you were ready to
Right.
accept
Right.
because it wouldn't have looked good, right?
I think that one of the other things that I really find in my practice of clients that tend to come to me are recovering perfectionists and people pleasers, because that's who I am,
Yeah.
because that was sort of what was created from my life experiences. So, yes, while I was resourcing and had creativity, and how amazing it is that I leaned on that playfulness at times, how amazing that that eased some anxiety throughout the time. But that does not take away from these really difficult, dark moments that I've experienced throughout my life where behind closed doors, I was experiencing those things, and externally, in order to belong and to be accepted, which we
Yeah.
all are striving for, right?
Right.
That's where those perfectionist people pleaser tendencies start to develop, because we are seeking connection. Relationships are
Mm,
the number one thing. We are not on the planet alone for a
right.
reason.
Right.
So that's why relationships are so important to me. I really believe that the best things come out of relationships, the healing that truly we can create together. And doing it alone, you can do things alone, and being alone is really important, to know how to be alone and to feel comfortable and confident being alone. But we need each other. And
Yeah.
it's really hard to turn back towards each other when you've had some distinctive traumas in your life that have caused strife and inside of you. And so I've wanted to have my practice be not just the relationship to yourself, but the relationship to others in that way. How do we go back in to vulnerability and intimacy when we've been hurt by
Yeah.
other people? How do we
Yeah.
do it?
So you are this little kid who is seeking connection, who is naturally driven, as we all are, toward at that point acceptance and belonging and all the things that maybe don't drive you in the same way now because of your level of awareness. And that kid not being given a handbook or maybe the right resources became a perfectionistic people pleaser. So, what was that like for you as a kid? You know,
Mhm.
the home versus what the world could see.
Right. Yeah, it's a really interesting question because of how it is intertwined, being part of a family that has addiction in it, especially with a high functioning addict, and also so much goodness in my family that I'm so grateful for. We are not one thing. So that conversation is so large and vast, and I know there's probably so many listeners that can relate to this, because they're like,
Mhm.
"Yes, I struggled with that dichotomy of both totally loving and having some really beautiful moments with my parent, while also feeling in particular moments, not protected or not seen or not heard, and being a highly sensitive being and being somebody that is also an intuitive. I've always been intuitive, even, I mean, we are all intuitive, but my gifts of being intuitive, really being able to see others, was something that was really clear to me as a young person.
Mm.
When you can see others when they maybe can't see or do not want to see themselves, it can be really hard to exist in the world, because people that don't want to be seen don't want you to see them, and they might respond in a really protective way that does not look kind and can be harmful. And if you're sensitive and don't understand that, which I didn't at a young
Mhm.
age, then you're taking that in as I'm bad, or developing the shame that then needs to be unpacked. So behind closed doors, I was unpacking all of the external darts that were going on. And also, I always hated the idea of pretending.
You don't like pretending, and yet you're this kid who is probably getting these mixed messages from the world around her. Like,
Right.
you probably felt that you were supposed to pretend and didn't want to pretend, and you
Mhm.
want to belong,
Right.
and there's an awareness that things are different for you.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so you cope, right? Right. You go to
Right?
school. And how did the perfectionism show up for you and the people pleasing?
Yeah. So I think perfectionism was around wanting to be accepted, not, I think the combination of maybe wanting to get it right, feeling like there is a way to get it right, whatever that even
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
There was maybe this part of if I do it right, if I get it right, then this will happen. Then this
Yeah.
thing will happen, right?
Yeah.
Versus being in the process. The perfectionist part is one that is has an agenda that is not actually about creating something perfectly. It's really the agenda of being accepted fully for who
Yeah.
you are.
And as adults, it doesn't necessarily feel more safe. So, like I think we have
Right?
our safe people and our safe places,
Yeah,
but it can be really hard to put yourself out there to a whole world. So, I think we still have self protections, and I think we will. And some of that might look like only showing parts of ourselves.
and then I think the people pleasing is around this idea of belonging. So when you're not getting some of your needs met, specifically emotional, then of course there's going to be, well, if I people please, which is all subconscious, unconscious,
Right.
if I'm adaptable, if I'm the chameleon, then of course you're going to accept me, like eventually, right?
Sounds like you're really describing, an adolescent and a teenager. I joke with people often that we all have a inner 12-year-old with a clipboard telling us how to do it right. And
Right.
that 12-year-old is looking around to everyone else and will find the person that we believe is the happiest, who has whatever it is we believe we don't have that we need, whether it's social safety or connection or belonging. And we'll make our hair look like her hair and we'll wear whatever shoes she's wearing. That's so typical, and
Exactly.
it's a survival instinct. It's social survival, right?
But I always had these dueling parts in me because there's a really fiery, really direct, I have conviction and an opinion. So it kind of conflicted with this people pleasing part in me
Yeah.
who always had a purpose and was really driven for connection in an authentic way. But I
Hmm.
don't think that that developed fully until I was totally out of the house and able to uh, experience life without my parents and family around me and was
Hmm.
able to really discover different types of people that could
Yeah.
accept different parts of me that
Yeah.
maybe some of the friend groups that I was growing up around didn't or
Yeah.
couldn't.
And I think that it is not surprising. And it's really interesting to hear you say until I got out of my house, right? It's like now that internalized identity of I am this person here is like, well, am I? Well, what am I? Who am I here? Who am I in this
Mhm.
new place where
Mhm.
I am not that? It
Mhm.
opens something up for you. It sounds like for you to begin to re-explore who you are, which I think we do over the whole course of our life. And I'm
Right.
so glad that we do. And it sounds like your program is really about that. So where did that take you?
Yeah, I think it's building safety internally.
Yeah.
Right? So there was something that was created in my atmosphere when I was able to get out of my house and I think this happens to a lot of people whether they're in the situation I was in or not, that when you're in a new environment, there's so many new things for you to explore about yourself that you never could have before. So I think it sort of applies to anybody on the next phase of their life. And for me, it was starting to learn what was safe and what safety is and not necessarily having the pendulum swing too far to either side. This has been sort of a key for me as I've gotten older. And I see this with clients too, just in learning things like boundaries, when you realize, first of all, you don't have them, to not have the pendulum just swing too far in the other direction,
Yeah.
to where you have walls, not doors, where
Yeah.
you are discerning who can come in and out. and allowing yourself to be more vulnerable. And maybe my vulnerability never really went away. I think that's part of being an empath. We sort of wear our hearts out there. I think that's a common theme for people that are empaths, deep feelers, intuitives. They'll say things like, that stranger just told me their entire life story. And that's kind of always been true for me. And
Yeah.
so it was learning when people are telling you their full life story, not to take in everything as yours. That's been a big part of my own healing journey, and something that I help people do is learn not just to process your emotions, but also how to really discern what's mine and
Yeah.
what's yours.
Well, it's interesting as you're talking about that pendulum swinging. And it sounds like at one end of the spectrum, which is probably where you were as a child, being so feeling, absorbing everything, allowing everything in without knowing you had choice. And that leads often for a lot of us to internalize, like you were talking about, feeling like you were bad, taking it on. This must be me. It's
Right.
mine. It's about me. Therefore, or it's my responsibility is something a lot of kids will feel and experience without necessarily being able to put words to. And then at the other end of the spectrum, that completely shut down, completely closed off, and only
Mhm.
feeling like I am safe if everything is blocked out and not allowing in. So it's
Right.
not surprising, though I think it is brave that your path to healing had to do with being in relationship again after having had trauma in
Mhm.
relationship, right? That
Yes.
in order to feel safe with others, I'm going to have to do that vulnerable thing of allowing them in. And I think it's something that a lot of people will relate to, both wanting and not wanting to do.
Yeah, yeah, it is a brave thing because there is risk involved. And I think that when we venture back out into relationship with other, and that does not have to look like romantic relationship. It can just look like friendship. We can have friendship wounds as well. Most people typically do. Um, but to be able to understand yourself, understand your own triggers, your own wants and needs, your own values, your own why. Once you are able to start to journey into that, and from a recovering perfectionist perspective, not to do it perfectly. It is not about knowing it all. It's
Yeah.
about starting the process to unpack what those things are. So then the next time you go into a relationship and you will meet those same lessons again, that you have new tools with this new person, and to also have a zoomed out perspective that some relationships are a season. They're not a lifetime, and
Yeah.
that's okay. And it doesn't mean something bad about them, and it doesn't mean something bad about you, but we can allow the relationship to teach us something, and we need it. I remember
Mhm.
there was a therapist that I worked with years ago. It was during after a really intense breakup for me. I was on a self journey to really learn all of the things about myself that I could. And there was a point in our work together where she said, Jerry, it's time. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she was like, it's time. You're ready for a relationship. That's the next phase of your healing. Now, whenever you're ready, she wasn't telling me to like go do it
Yeah.
now, but she was just aware there is such a thing as like too much uh research, and like you can also distract yourself from the actual
The
action
actual
of,
doing. Yeah.
yes, the putting
I've
yourself
likely
out
said this on the
there.
podcast before, but I had a teacher once tell me I wasn't allowed to read any more books.
Mhm.
And all I
Mhm.
wanted to do was read a book because I didn't want to have to actually do any of it. I wanted to just keep learning. I'll read another
Yes.
book and
Yes, it
I'll
feels
learn a little
good.
more. Yeah.
It feels good, and there's no shame in it, but there
No.
is a point where there's only so much you can read before we actually have to explore what it's like to be in relationship.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing for me, is teaching people and holding space for people to understand their humanness, and
Yeah.
also that the real work is in the doing.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And it's much more vulnerable and it requires that bravery, the
Mhm. Mhm.
putting ourselves in situations where we do not have certainty, predictability, where we don't have all the control because we can never have all of the control in a relationship. And, being a child as you were who had experienced trauma with, those people who are supposed to be our safe people, right? And
Yeah.
what that the effect that that has on us because we can come up with some very generalized kind of rules about humans based on our experiences with our parents and
Right.
or beliefs of who we are in the world that can keep us from feeling like we can or should put ourselves out there. You know, it's interesting, Jerry, because as you were talking about even friendships being hard, you made me realize exactly how hard that is that sometimes I think I take for granted,
Mm.
opening up my women's circle to people and having them reach out to me interested, but so afraid to get on, to be seen, and to speak
Mhm.
with other women. Uh,
Yeah.
it's not easy. And in my courses, the level of vulnerability to come in and talk about what's hard and challenging, even knowing that the people who are there have the same struggles,
Mhm.
that's so vulnerable and can keep people from actually accessing each other and accessing relationship.
Mhm.
I think it'd be really interesting to hear, how you bridge that from being either completely shut down, completely open to being in that place in the middle.
Yeah. And that makes sense, right? It makes sense to be afraid.
Mhm.
And as cliche as it is, thinking about courage, being afraid and doing it anyway, I really
Yeah.
do think it's that. But it's also being able to be with yourself. I think you can also look at, not just relationship hopping, where you hear of that person that's like relationship into the next relationship, where you stay in a friendship too long because of the fear of, oh gosh, I've always known this person. But we go through phases in our life, we change. We have those early relationships that have created wounds in us that make it really scary to start again. So I think it's first acknowledging that, right? It's being okay with the fact that, and that's so human. There is not a person on this planet that's gonna say every relationship I've had has been the best relationship I've ever had. It's just not gonna happen.
Mm.
And you're just
Yeah.
trying to find your people.
Yeah.
And once you are able to start to be okay with yourself, or maybe even not okay with yourself, but okay not being okay with
Yeah.
other people, then you can start to bridge the gap between being alone and not knowing where to start. It's so while part of my story, a part of my trauma history is that I'm the adult child of an alcoholic, it is not all of me. And it's just one piece of my story. It's as simple as starting to acknowledge these truths. And in adulthood, it is being responsible for it, right? And it's is something that I can use as a pain point to turn into purpose and allow me to understand more about myself. And no, I don't want to go through some of the things that I've been through previously, but I did choose to look at the things in my life that have hurt me or have wounded me or brought me to places that were really dark and learn from those experiences in a way that's allowed me to be more relatable and allowed me to be more vulnerable.
Yeah. You said something that's really interesting. The only way to be related to and to be relatable is to actually be yourself and find the people who can relate.
And that's hard. That is hard. I just want to acknowledge that truth. It is
Mhm.
hard. It's still hard for me.
The idea of getting to know ourselves is both simple and complex in a way because, at least in my opinion and in my experience, I think that we pick up a lot of things that we think are us, or
Yeah.
we might judge ourselves harshly for
Mhm.
things that we have picked up along the way, right?
Well, how do we get comfortable being ourselves and talking about how hard this is? I
Yeah.
actually think it's about being okay, not being comfortable.
Yeah.
Sitting with the discomfort is actually the key. And that is really hard because that means we have to build a window of tolerance that maybe we were never taught.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting concept that, again, we're not taught about, like the difficulty in actually tolerating feeling. And I think you were,
Mm.
kind of
Mhm.
speaking to this earlier. The feeling is actually really hard. And
Mhm.
when we don't recognize that we are dodging our feelings, we'll just keep dodging our feelings and we'll each develop our own set of
Yeah.
patterns for
Yeah.
shutting down or detaching from or soothing. And we might not even notice that we're doing it.
So one of the things is, as you were talking, I was thinking about how we can think about our feelings and not feel our feelings. This is really common. And even in my own beginning journey of therapy, way, way, way back in the day, I didn't realize I was doing this, but it was my way of protecting myself because it was really scary for me to be in my body. And I know that one of the things that you've shared with your listeners about nervous system regulation is helping people be in their body. That is where those feelings live. And learning how to process them without feeling too overwhelmed or like we're drowning, which these are all things to notice. And part of what I do is help people just learn to notice without judgment. You may have fear, but then we can talk about the fear without judgment. I like to say we take your fear out to tea. We're getting to know it as though it is truly, and it is, a part of you that is telling you something. It really
Mhm.
starts with being able to sit with the discomfort. So it can be as simple as sensing into, well, do you feel tightness in your chest? Do you
Mhm.
notice that there's a frog in your throat? This has happened to me a lot throughout my life being an empath. I I am somebody that can cry easily. And in my later years, I've just been feeling my emotions so regularly that I don't have that need to hide in my throat because I actually allow myself to cry. But when we suppress them, they stay in our body and they formulate themselves maybe into a back issue
Yeah.
or maybe into gut issues.
And what's interesting is that you grew up this highly sensitive person with feelings you were having to figure out how to manage. And I definitely went the other way and
Mm,
disconnected so much that, even as an adult who had a degree in psychology, I'd go into therapy and always say I was fine. And I really believed it. I didn't think anything
yeah.
was ever
Yeah.
wrong. And
Hmm.
it took a lot of work to feel, actually, to like
Yeah.
be in my body and to
Yes.
feel. And, I think I was already teaching yoga and breath work and all these things that I really thought I was there, but I had really blunted that spectrum of emotion, and not intentionally. And it was a way of coping. And so, just for those out there who might be at that other end of the spectrum, I think that it's really interesting that it can go either way. That if you have
Yeah.
a lot of feelings,
Yeah.
it can end up feeling like a really significant detachment. And, the work that I do with people in the
Mm.
relationship with food, that is often a function of coping, right? And so
Yeah.
that again tends to double down on the disconnection from body. And so actually feeling safe being in our
Yeah.
skin and feeling
Yep.
safe, feeling our feelings and trusting that it won't all come undone if we do. That if I
Yeah.
feel what I'm feeling, if I show up as who I am, that it won't all fall apart. We we
Yeah.
we build these selves that we show the world like a castle of cards. It can feel like sometimes and can feel very tenuous. Like if one falls,
Yeah.
everything will fall. And the reality is that that's not what happens,
Yeah.
but it can be really scary and it can feel like that castle is going to fall.
Yes. Yes. To everything you're saying. I'm like nodding my head. They can't see me, but I'm nodding my head.
Yeah.
It's just a returning back to ourselves. And then once we start this process of awareness and learning how to regulate our nervous system in some ways, learning some new tools, and really our whys. What do you want? What do you need in friendship? What do you want? What do you need in a romantic relationship? I think a lot of people maybe don't have those honest conversations with yourself because maybe there's the fear, well, is there that friend out there that could meet
Yeah.
those needs and wants? Is there that relationship that could meet those needs and wants?
Yeah. Yeah. That fear, the fearful belief, it's not possible for me, will keep a lot of people from doing a lot of things. And what's underneath that often is the fear of the vulnerability of trying and not having it come to us, whatever it is we want.
Yeah, and I think that when we do start to meet people that feel safe for our system, that's when those common things that are in the way of helping us feel more ourselves start to dissipate.
Yeah.
So the fear of intimacy or the parts that are protecting us that learned that from such a young age, or the limiting beliefs or being conflict averse. When you're around somebody that's able to hear you say, I'm frustrated or I'm disappointed without running away from you, the attachment style that maybe you had ingrained in your system from such a young age can start to question itself. Is this actually what I need to do? Do I need to run away? Right? Or can I actually turn towards? And I think when you have more of a courageousness around relationship to be able to turn towards the people that make your nervous system feel safe, you will start to heal and you will
Yeah.
start to feel more intimate and more connection. But it does take time and
Yeah.
being patient because maybe there was a time that somebody wasn't patient with you. Like, get over this feeling, get over it now. When does that ever work?
Yeah.
Right? That
Yeah.
doesn't work. So we have to be patient. And that's where that compassion comes in. You are turning towards yourself with those things that you needed. It's the reparenting process, but it's also, I believe, our job as an adult to break the patterns that, again, if we look into our past, if we look at our ancestors, were doing the best they could with what they had. No matter what has happened, no matter how bad it was, we're doing the best they could with what they had. Maybe protecting themselves in a way that was really harmful. And that
Mhm.
was the best they could with what they had.
Yeah.
They were doing their best. It does not mean it wasn't harmful. It doesn't mean your trauma is not worthy of working through, or that, and of course you could be victims of things that absolutely require uh intervention in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. You said something I think that is really important to highlight, that we can begin by doing this for ourselves before we feel comfortable and ready to do this with others. And that healing that we do for ourselves, with ourselves, is one of the bigger parts of this whole process. And that is what can begin to build us toward feeling safe to do the next thing and to be more courageous and to put ourselves out there. And it doesn't have to be, and I think you're saying this in everything that you're sharing, but it doesn't have to be with everyone everywhere,
Mm.
you
I
know?
actually think it shouldn't be with everyone
Yeah.
everywhere. And I think that's what can be hard with social media and figuring out the balance of what to share and what
Mhm.
not to share. Being able to figure out for yourself, really discerning what is right for you. And that's where boundaries come in. And boundaries are not walls, they are doors. And a coach that I worked with, who is lovely, this has always stuck with me, said that boundaries are the information to help others love us best.
Yeah.
It's information to help others love us best. And it really is that. Boundaries are for you and your relationship. So you're not bleeding into the place of resentment. And there are keys to when relationships, specifically romantic relationships, get into that danger zone, I would call it. And the Gottman Institute, there's four relationship cues for that. So the four horsemen of the apocalypse, it's criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And when we see these things show up in relationship, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, but often it can be our most intimate relationships, that those are cues that something needs to change in order for it to remain and have longevity. And I find that usually when we get into the contempt area, it is when resentment has built because we aren't able to talk about what we want and need and set boundaries for what we want and need. So
Yeah.
it's practical stuff. It's like maybe you don't want to go out at night, but then you force yourself to go out because you think your partner wants you to go out. But did you even ask? Were you
Right.
able to state what you needed? Maybe what you need, maybe you had a really long day and it's really not right. Is this a moment where you can offer your partner an opportunity to connect with you, validate your experience, and you can become closer?
Yeah.
But if you were taught that sharing your feelings isn't okay, then maybe you completely avoid the moment of connection to your true self and your boundary, which is, I do not have the capacity to go out. And then
Yep.
you end up getting in an argument later because you forced yourself to go out. So it's these things, and it could be in friendship too. It's
It absolutely
allow
could. And I can see
right,
that there as well. And the patterns that so many women have of people pleasing can certainly, go both ways into both friendship and romantic relationship. When we bend constantly for others, we do build
right,
resentments. And
right,
when those patterns go unchecked, uncommunicated, they can build toward contempt. It's really easy to wish for people to know what we're thinking and feeling and not catch that we're not saying it out loud and giving them the opportunity to know.
right. And as you were talking, it was making me think about people pleasers who were taught to be needless.
Yeah.
They were taught that having needs is not okay. It is
Hmm.
not okay for you to say what you need and what you want because you're not going to get the result that you want. The connection and the attachment will be lost. And so I think that in this journey to having conscious, healthy relationships with the people we're meant to have them with,
Yeah.
it is journeying down the road of really asking yourself what you need.
Hmm.
What do you need?
And again, people might struggle to answer that
Absolutely.
because we will fall into patterns of looking to everyone else to meet their needs in order to
Mhm.
get our need for love and connection and belonging and acceptance met. That it is often easy to look outside ourselves and go, where can I have value? How can I show my value to the world? How can
Right.
I make myself valuable so that I will remain needed? And to have
Right.
a need can feel like a risk
Mhm.
to being needed.
Absolutely. And that's actually a common theme that I have seen with clients of mine who have struggled with people pleasing in their relationships, or maybe have an old school limiting belief around what it means to be in relationship is sort of this like idea of serving your partner.
Mhm.
And there is something to be said for interdependence and knowing the difference between independence, codependence, interdependence. We need each other. So, and there is such a thing as compromise, but being able to state what you need and allow your partner to meet you or your friend to meet you, whatever relationship this is, you are allowing that relationship to grow in a way that you wouldn't if you didn't state it. And also, you're suppressing a part of yourself. You
Mhm.
are literally saying, what I need, who I am is not okay, isn't welcome here. You're messaging that to yourself every time that you're not able to speak from a place of conviction for the parts of you that maybe learned they weren't welcome.
Yeah. And that is an interesting thing to think about as well, as you say, interdependence versus, say, codependence, right? That
Mhm,
the way that codependence can grow out of similarly people
mhm.
pleasing or
Right.
patterns and roles that we had as children that stick with us and grow with us into adulthood, that needing to be needed
Mhm,
and the belief that if I am not needed
mhm.
or maybe an over reliance on another,
Yeah.
I'm not okay.
Right. And that just makes me think of the journey to the self, going into the self. It's a delicate process. It needs to be done with tons of empathy because it is easy to go into a place as you're journeying into this and you start to have these, moments where you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot even believe that I didn't see this until I saw it, which is always what happens. But you
Hmm.
might have that crisis moment where you're like, hey, who am I? Who am I without being in this role. And I think that happens to anybody that starts journeying within because they start to realize, well, these are things I picked up along the way. And one of the things I do in my program, Mirror to the Self, um, is help people milestone map to notice these patterns of behavior where we picked them up along the way and how to then go back and understand what we actually need and where our needs came from. And these things change too throughout our lives. And I think in intimate relationships, that's something to think about is that you might actually know what you want and need. Okay, so you're at the place where you're able to say it, but then it changes because we're at different phases of our life.
Yeah.
And so it's returning to yourself at all different points. We need to keep having these conversations with ourselves as well. So we're able to keep our relationships feeling really conscious and really mindful.
Yeah. It's interesting. I would love for you to say more about milestone mapping because likely it's similar to a process that we do in EMDR. What are those milestones and what can they teach us?
Yeah. So this is a connecting of the dots. This is looking at your patterns and it's going through your life from start to now because the moment you popped out, you weren't popping out going, I need to please everyone. You were actually just trying to figure out how to be a human. And so it's connecting the dots from that moment, all of the nature versus nurture components of who you are to be able to see, okay, well, this happened here and this happened here. So now I can see why this happened here and this happened here. Again, there's no judgment in this. It's really to lay it out so we can then understand what is in our bags. This is a big thing for me is that it's not about not having baggage. It's about knowing what's in our bags, why it's there, and then essentially Marie Kondoing it, right? So saying, thank you so much for this. And then you can donate it. Maybe you need to throw it away, or maybe you are keeping it. Maybe this is a really valuable thing for you to keep, or possibly it's something that you need to transform into a new way of being. Maybe you get really defensive when somebody shares their feelings with you. Well, why? Maybe that's your way of saying to someone, I'm really overwhelmed right now with what you're feeling because I love you so much and I have no idea what to do for you. That's a really different thing than being like, you're too sensitive. This is your fault, right? Which was a very key thing. If we go back to, my childhood along the way, whether it was friends or family, I was a lot for people because I was a feeling being constantly. I could not help it. So I was really external in my processing. And I can understand why that would be overwhelming to a system that doesn't know how to process that. And so it's knowing, how do I process? Am I an internal processor, an external processor? And figuring out, well, how am I the way that I am? So you're, able to look at what is inside your bags. You're able to kind of start to parse through what those things are, but in a way that's really reverent to it. Like you are really honoring this process because those things are who you are. It's all
Mm.
information and it's being able to start to do the zoom out versus the being in it, right? Like when we were talking about shame before, I am this thing. Now you're able to step away and notice, oh, okay, these are things that happened to me or these are beliefs that I adopted
Mhm.
and you are able to zoom out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that this is huge for people. And we have patterns of coping that will line up with those experiences on that timeline. And
Mhm.
we also might over identify with them, right? I am this thing that I do. It's not
Mhm.
actually who we are, but to be
Right.
able to then look at it and say, thank you because you helped me when I needed you. And this is no longer helping me, but what do I need? And to start to identify that. And so it sounds like this also gives clarity to what are my needs and what do I want now?
Exactly. Then you can decide what you are going to keep, what you need to transform, and also give yourself some tools, some new mind body connection tools. That's where nervous system regulation comes in, understanding secure attachment and being able to find those resources within yourself so then we can reorganize and rebuild. And then that's where relationships come in, because that is the next phase, is consciously relating from a place of knowing your bags. You got to know your
Mhm.
bags in order to be able to let somebody know when you're letting them in, well, these are my triggers. And that doesn't mean allowing yourself to just have triggers all over the place and be irresponsible with them. It's actually the opposite. It's being responsible for the things that make you you in a way where you are emotionally processing
Mhm.
those things, but having the tools to do it, because so many of us were not given those tools. And that's part of what I help people do, is do so with a process of being very curious and compassionate to then repair and reflect on it.
It sounds like the process that you're describing is not being fully healed, fully complete, or expecting ourselves to be fully perfect,
Right.
knowing that we have things that we are bringing into every relationship with ourselves, with our friends, with our partners, but to be able to name what it is that we are working on, that we need to work through, or to be able to identify where that vulnerable edge is for us. And I think that's the accountability piece. It's acknowledging what is there, not pretending it's not there, not believing it has to go away before we can connect,
Mhm.
but then being responsible for it.
Yeah. Yeah, being responsible for it. You are not a victim of your story. Your story is what makes you who you are. And it doesn't look perfect, but finding the people that we can be imperfect with, that love us exactly how we are.
Yeah.
And knowing that the people that can't, what that means to me, when someone can't do that, they just have more work to do, because they're probably suffering inside as well. They're
Mhm.
struggling to accept themselves. So they can't
Yeah.
accept you if they can't accept themselves, you know?
Yeah.
And that's okay. And that's their journey. And we need to be discerning over who we're allowing in the most intimate ways, not as a way to protect ourselves and be in fear, but actually the opposite, but to have an honoring of the work that we're doing within ourselves, to be in a place of, I deserve to be in relationships where people can really meet me and they can allow me to cry and be right there with me, or respect my needs and wants and love me exactly how I am, failures
Yeah.
and all. Yeah.
Huh. And so this is the piece of the consciousness in relationships. It's becoming conscious of ourselves and
Mhm.
all of those aspects of self, those parts of us, so that we can then be in conscious connection with others.
Exactly. And we have to do it with ourselves first. We need to be taking ourselves out on dates. We need to be looking at our likes and wants and needs. And this isn't just like the dark nitty gritty stuff. That stuff is important. Inner child work, being able to go within, all of that stuff has its place. This is also about the playfulness, the pleasure, the things that bring us into more presence, the kid-like things that do go away when our innocence is either taken from us, or we get older and we think we have to be a certain way in the world and
Mhm.
perform. So it's actually returning to that playfulness and being
Yeah.
allowed to access pleasure. And I don't just mean sexual pleasure. I just mean pleasure. I mean, do you like being outside and having the sun on your face,
Yeah.
but you work indoors every day? Well, what are you doing? You need to really consider these things as parts of your journey to yourself and being more conscious of yourself. It's the good stuff too. It's about being in the present moment and learning how to just experience life without feeling like we've got to be outside of our body. And
Mhm.
that's where relationship to ourself is the starting point, and then learning how to have those conscious relationships with other can really start to fulfill us and give
Yeah.
us a lot of healing.
Yeah. Being curious and getting to know yourself then becomes, in a way, a resource. And there's so many resources within it. It's really interesting how many people, as adults, if you ask them what they do for fun, what they enjoy, it's hard to answer. And then it also can bring up this pressure to have things that we identify with and as if it would make us somehow more well-rounded or a more interesting person. And it's different. It's finding those things that help us be present, that help
Mhm.
us be in this moment. And Jerry, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about your program.
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me. And there are so many different facets of relationship that I would love to continue to go into. So I would love to be back and talk about some of those branches and components to help people learn how to have more conscious relationships with others, themselves, and be able to feel comfortable in with my program. What it does is get you on that path to uncovering what is in your way, to having these types of relationships with yourself and other people, how to resource, claim compassionate boundaries, have more of an understanding of emotions. It's really being able to get into the nitty gritty of it. And this is sort of where I have turned my pain into power, is these things that maybe were held against me by people who didn't understand what was going on, or even me understanding what was going on. I've learned now how to process this information in a way that I can also help other people understand what the heck is going on with their emotional center. So you can be your true self and understand your full expression. And also stop worrying about failure or other people's opinions, which is a really difficult one to conquer. And I think that that's an ongoing process for many people in the, world of wanting to belong.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Jerry, you have shared so much that has been so helpful, I'm sure, to everyone who's listening about relationship with self and others. Are there any practical tools that you can share?
Yeah, I would love to. You can read up on all the trendy topics about attachment styles and different ways that relationships go awry. But it's like, okay, well, what do I do in the moments that they're really funky? How do I actually apply this? And so I think that to explore emotions from the perspective of what you were not allowed to feel growing up. So, something in your home that was not a common emotion that you saw, or if you did experience it, there was some shame involved or turning away from you, to be
Okay.
able to work on that emotion or even just to discover what it is. I mean, it could be just be as simple as taking out an emotions wheel, or of course you can reach out to me and I'm happy to work with you on that.
Amazing. Oh, that's so helpful. I'm so grateful for you sharing not just those resources, but all of your knowledge here today. And I'm sure that everyone is going to be excited to find you and to check out your program. So know that all of those links will be in the show notes. I'll provide some free resources for in the show notes so you can find and access all the words for feelings and different sensations and states of being. If you find yourself curious about what do I feel, most of us have a really limited vocabulary around it. For most people, we can name happy, sad, angry. So it'll be really interesting for people wherever you are in this journey. I think that there will be something that will help you with.
And I really appreciate being able to talk to you today. I feel like we could talk for so many more
I
hours
know,
about
I
these
know.
things.
I love listening to you just get into the flow of talking about what you do. And it's obviously so natural to you and the result of you doing this for yourself. So I just want to thank you so much for coming and giving us your time and your energy and for educating us on all that you know. And I can't wait to learn more.
Thank you. I can't
All
wait to
right.
come back. See you soon.
Bye. Thank you all for being here, for watching or listening along. Jerry and I will be reconnecting next week to share more about the practical ways in which we can begin to approach relationships, communication in difficult moments, what boundaries really are beyond a trend in the media, and how we can actually begin to put them in place in ways that really work for ourselves and with others. And we'll talk about so much more. Jerry is about to launch her latest endeavor, Mirror to the Self, a program designed to delve deeper into these transformative themes and beyond. And if you are interested in joining me this summer or this fall for a retreat, it is now time to get on the list so that you are the first to know and can sign up. I've got a lot of really fun things coming down the pipeline, so make sure to sign up for my newsletter so that you are on the list to get all of the information and the discounts so you can get started. I appreciate you so much. It would be amazing if you took time to follow along, to subscribe, to rate and review. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you're interested in. What do you want to learn about? I'm here, all ears. And until next week, take care.